I used to believe that family didn't have to be born. It could be built. That love, given freely, would always find its way back. When I met Lisa, I saw a reflection of the daughter I never had. She was 28, ambitious but lost, working 2 jobs just to stay afloat. I helped her, paid her rent, covered her car repairs, even opened my home when she said she needed a place that felt like family. She started calling me Mom, and I'll admit, it filled something in me I didn't even know was empty. But love, I've learned, can be the easiest thing to use, and the hardest thing to take back. The moment the money stopped, the love disappeared too. What hurt most wasn't losing the money. It was realizing that the word mom had never meant the same thing to her that it did to me. When you live alone long enough, silence becomes its own kind of company. I used to wake up to the sound of my husband's slippers on the hardwood floors, the hum of his old radio in the kitchen. Now it's just the creak of the ceiling fan, the birds outside, and the sound of my own footsteps. It's peaceful, in a way, but some days that peace feels like a weight pressing on your chest. After Robert passed, the house didn't change much. I kept the same lace curtains, the same coffee mugs, even the dent in the sofa where he used to sit and read the paper. It's funny how you hold on to little things, not because they matter, but because they make the emptiness look a little less empty. My daughter Sarah used to tease me about it. She'd say, "Mama, you've got a museum of memories in here." She was right. And when I lost her too, that museum became a shrine. For a long time, I didn't think I had much left to give. But I've always been a caretaker at heart. I spent most of my life as a nurse, and after I retired, I started volunteering at the local community kitchen downtown. It gave me a reason to get dressed in the morning. Something about feeding people, watching their faces soften with gratitude, filled the quiet. It made me feel useful again. That's where I met Lisa. She came in one Tuesday morning, looking out of place in that line of tired faces. She couldn't have been more than 28. Thin, nervous energy about her. Hair pulled back too tight, like she was trying to hold herself together. When it was her turn, she smiled at me. This small, polite smile, and said, "Thank you, ma'am." Her voice cracked a little when she said it, and I noticed she didn't take much food. Just a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. I don't know what it was about her. Maybe it was the way she said thank you, like it cost her something to say it. Or maybe it was the way she kept her head down, eyes fixed on the table like she didn't belong there. I'd seen hundreds of faces come through that kitchen, but something about Lisa stayed with me. The next day she was back. This time I sat down with her for a bit. She told me she'd moved to Charleston a few months ago for a job that fell through. Said she was living with a friend until she could get back on her feet. I could tell she was embarrassed to be there. Every time she spoke, her eyes flicked around the room, like she didn't want anyone to see her talking to an old woman in an apron. When her shift at the diner started up again, she stopped by after work to help us clean up. I didn't ask her to. She just showed up one evening with her hair falling out of its bun, sleeves rolled up, ready to work. I liked that about her. She didn't talk much, but when she did, she had this spark, like someone who's been through hard things and still finds ways to smile. I remember one night, we stood by the sink washing dishes together. I joked that I'd pay her in leftovers, and she laughed. A real laugh this time, not the polite kind. It filled the whole room. For a second, I caught myself smiling in a way I hadn't in years. It felt familiar, like something long forgotten had stirred awake inside me. After that, we started seeing more of each other. Sometimes we'd grab coffee after the kitchen closed. Other days, she'd stop by my place to help me with the garden. She said it reminded her of her grandmother's yard growing up. We'd plant marigolds and basil, and she'd talk about wanting to go back to school someday. I'd listen, nodding, encouraging her. It felt good, being part of someone's dreams again. One evening, it started raining while she was at my house. I offered to drive her home, but she hesitated. Said her roommate wasn't thrilled about guests, that it was complicated. I didn't pry, but something about the way she said it tugged at me. She looked tired, soaked through, and when I handed her a towel, she smiled and whispered, "You remind me of my mom." That one sentence did something to me. I felt this lump in my throat that I hadn't felt in years. I told her, half joking. "Well, I'm flattered, but I'm sure your mama's younger and prettier." She smiled, but there was a flicker in her eyes, something heavy. She said her mother wasn't in the picture anymore. She didn't say why, and I didn't ask. After that night, it was like we'd both quietly decided to be a part of each other's lives. She started calling me Miss Margaret at first, but eventually it turned into Mama M, then just Mom. The first time she said it, I laughed it off. But the second time, when she hugged me goodbye and whispered, "Love you, Mom," I didn't correct her. It felt too good, too right. Looking back now, maybe that was my mistake. Believing that love was something you could fill someone else's emptiness with. But at the time, I just felt grateful. Grateful to be needed again. Lisa's visits became more frequent. I'd find her waiting on my porch some evenings, sipping sweet tea and humming to herself. She'd bring groceries sometimes, or flowers from the corner market. It wasn't long before I started giving her small bits of money. "Just until you get back on your feet," I'd say. First it was $50 for a bill, then $200 for rent, then a little more when her car broke down. I didn't even think twice. I wanted to help, and she was so thankful every time. She'd hug me tight, eyes glistening, and say, "You don't know what this means to me, Mom." I'd tell her it was nothing. That's what mothers do. But I started to notice small things, little changes in her tone, her timing. She'd stop by less often when she didn't need anything. Then when she did, her visits would come with stories that didn't quite add up. Something about a job that never started, a landlord who lost her check, a friend who borrowed too much. Still, I told myself, she's trying. I think part of me didn't want to see what was happening. Because if I admitted it, I'd have to admit that I'd been fooled before, by life, by people, by hope. And after losing so much, I didn't think I could bear one more heartbreak, even a small one. One Sunday, after church, I came home to find Lisa sitting on my porch steps, crying. She told me her roommate had kicked her out, said she didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't even hesitate. I told her she could stay with me for a while. That night, as she settled into the guest room, Sarah's old room, I stood in the doorway watching her unpack. She had so little, a few clothes, some books, a framed picture of her and a dog. When she saw me, she smiled softly and said, "You sure about this, Mom?" I nodded. "Of course, honey. Family helps family." That word, family, it hung in the air between us, warm, comforting, maybe even dangerous. Because once you let someone into your home, into your heart, it's hard to imagine they'll ever leave it broken. The days that followed felt like a strange kind of healing. The house was alive again. Lisa would make coffee in the mornings, humming in the kitchen, and we'd eat breakfast together at the same table where I once sat alone. She'd ask me about my nursing days, about Sarah, about how Robert and I met. She listened like it all mattered, like my stories still had a place in the world. I found myself cooking bigger meals, laughing more, even planning small outings. One weekend, we drove out to the farmer's market together, and she linked her arm through mine as we walked. A few people smiled, probably thinking we were mother and daughter. I didn't correct them. I just smiled back. At night, when I'd pass her room, I'd hear her talking softly on the phone, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. I never eavesdropped, but I'd pause outside the door and whisper a prayer that she'd find whatever peace she was chasing. For a while, it felt like we both had, but kindness, I've learned, can be a double-edged thing. It can fill your home with light, or invite the shadows in. At first, I only saw the light. I saw the daughter I never got to watch grow old, the one who would have sat beside me on quiet evenings, talking about life and love. I wanted to believe that, in helping Lisa, maybe I was healing some part of myself too. It's only later you realize, not everyone who calls you mom means it from the heart. And sometimes, the moment you stop giving is the moment they start walking away. It's strange how easily someone can weave themselves into your life without you even realizing it. One morning you're setting the table for one, and the next you're pouring 2 cups of coffee without thinking twice. That's how it happened with Lisa. Before long, she wasn't just a guest anymore. She was part of my everyday rhythm. We cooked together, cleaned together, even fell asleep to the same old movies I used to watch with Robert. She'd sit cross-legged on the couch, half listening, half laughing, and I'd find myself smiling just watching her. The house had laughter again, the kind that echoed softly against the walls. I didn't know how much I'd missed it until it came back. She started calling me Mom all the time by then. Morning, Mom. Love you, Mom. Don't wait up, Mom. It rolled off her tongue so naturally that after a while, I stopped hearing the ache in it. I just let it fill the quiet. I think I wanted to believe I'd earned that word, that somehow God had given me a second chance at the kind of love I'd lost. It wasn't just emotional, though. I wanted to help her. I wanted her to succeed. So when she said her phone was about to get cut off, I told her I'd cover it. Just this once. When she mentioned taking a few college classes at night, I offered to pay part of the tuition. Education's never wasted, I told her. And when her car broke down, I gave her a check for a down payment on a used one. I remember handing it to her, watching her eyes well up as she whispered, "You're the only one who's ever believed in me." You'd be surprised how easily those words can wrap around your heart. Belief. It's such a small thing to give, but it can feel like the whole world to someone who needs it. And maybe I needed it too. For a while, everything felt right. We'd spend evenings sitting out on the porch, listening to cicadas hum through the warm Charleston air. She'd tell me about her dreams, wanting to start her own catering business, maybe buy a small house someday. I'd listen, nodding, picturing her life unfolding like something out of a movie. Sometimes she'd tease me for tearing up when she talked about her future. "You're such a softie, Mom," she'd say, and I'd laugh because she wasn't wrong. But it wasn't all perfect. Even early on, there were small things, tiny, hairline cracks in that perfect little world we'd built. One afternoon, I came home from running errands and found her sitting in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone. I smiled, asked her how her shift at the cafe went. She froze for half a second before answering. "Oh yeah, it was fine." Her voice didn't sound like fine, though. There was something off. I asked what time she got off, and she said, 2, without looking up. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 4. It wasn't a big deal, not on its own. People lose track of time. But I noticed it again, a week later, when she said her boss had given her a raise. I congratulated her, proud as if it were my own daughter's achievement. But that same night, I saw an unopened stack of bills tucked halfway under her bed. If she'd gotten a raise, why were they still unpaid? Still, I didn't press. I told myself that trust meant not needing to know every detail. Sometimes I'd hear her on the phone late at night, whispering fast, urgent words I couldn't quite catch. When she saw me the next morning, she'd smile like nothing happened. "Just a friend," she'd say. And maybe that's all it was. I told myself it wasn't my place to question. After all, she wasn't a child. She was an adult, just one trying to get by in a hard world. That's what I'd tell myself each time the money went out faster than it came in. The truth is, I liked being needed. I liked being the person she came to when things fell apart. It gave me a purpose again, something I hadn't felt since Sarah died. Every time Lisa looked at me with those grateful eyes, every time she called me Mom, it patched something small inside me. It didn't matter that sometimes I had to dip into my savings. It didn't matter that I'd started writing checks more than I was cashing them. Love has a funny way of making excuses sound noble. One evening, we were watching an old Audrey Hepburn movie, Breakfast at Tiffany's. I asked her how school was going. She hesitated, then smiled and said, "Oh, I dropped that class. It wasn't really for me." I nodded, pretending to understand, but something in me twinged. I'd paid for that class. I'd been so proud when she'd registered, even helped her buy the books. She must have seen the disappointment on my face because she quickly added, "I'm still figuring things out, Mom. You know how it is." I did. God help me, I did. There were days when she was her old self again, bubbly, warm, full of charm. She'd cook dinner before I got home, candles lit on the table, music humming low in the background. We'd eat, talk about nothing and everything, and I'd forget all the little worries that had started to gather in the corners of my mind. But then, just as quickly, there'd be days when she was cold, distant. She'd disappear for hours without saying where she was going. When she came back, she'd be tired, irritable, quick to snap. Once, when I gently asked if something was wrong, she sighed and said, "You don't have to fix everything. Mom, I'm not one of your patients." That one stung more than I'd admit. I tried to pull back a little after that, to give her space, but it was hard. When you love someone, even a chosen someone, your first instinct is to care, to help, to understand, and she knew that about me. There was one afternoon, I'll never forget it. I was sitting at the kitchen table going through my checkbook. I'd been meaning to get my finances more organized. It was something Robert always did, and I'd let it slide for too long. As I was writing down the numbers, I realized things weren't adding up. My savings account was smaller than I remembered, not alarmingly so, but enough to make me pause. Lisa walked in just then, her hair still damp from a shower. "Hey, Mom," she said, grabbing an apple from the counter. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I smiled faintly. "Just going over bills. I think I've been a little too generous lately." She froze mid-bite, then laughed it off. "Well, generosity looks good on you. Besides, you always tell me God blesses givers, right?" I nodded, but something in her tone, light, teasing, made my stomach twist. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker across the garden. I thought about Sarah again. She was around Lisa's age when she passed. Maybe that's why I'd been so quick to open my heart again. It wasn't just about helping Lisa. It was about filling a silence that had lived inside me for years. Maybe I should have seen the signs. The way she'd deflect every time I asked about her job. How her stories about her family never quite matched. Or the time she claimed her bank account was frozen and asked to use mine to hold a payment for a few days. I told myself it was harmless, that she was just trying to get by. But love can make you blind in the gentlest ways. One weekend, I woke early to the smell of pancakes. Lisa was in the kitchen, humming softly, her hair in a messy bun, sunlight pooling around her. She looked so at peace, so much like the daughter I'd imagined having. She smiled at me and said, "Sit down, Mom. I made breakfast for you." It was such a small gesture, but it filled me with warmth. For a moment, I thought maybe everything was fine. Maybe the worry in my chest was just me being cautious, overprotective. I remember laughing, telling her, "You didn't have to do all this." She grinned. "Well, I owed you one, didn't I?" I wanted to believe that was true. But deep down, something had already begun to shift. Not between us, not yet, but inside me. A whisper that said this kind of love, the kind you pay for, isn't love at all. I pushed the thought away, focusing instead on her laughter, the sunlight, the sound of silverware on china. I told myself that what we had was real, that she cared for me as much as I did for her. But every story that starts with kindness has a point where it turns. I didn't know it then, but mine was coming soon, and when it did, the cracks I'd been ignoring would finally split wide open. It started quietly, like most things do when they're about to change. At first, I didn't notice how quickly the money was going. I wasn't exactly careless, but I'd never been one to stare at numbers all day. I'd always lived modestly, and I trusted that what I had saved after Robert passed would be enough to keep me comfortable. I never thought to question where it was all going. After all, I'd been helping Lisa out of love, not obligation. You don't put a price tag on that kind of thing. But love, I was starting to learn, doesn't pay much attention to the fine print. It began with a small withdrawal, something I barely registered. Then another and another. She'll pay me back someday, I told myself, even though I never expected her to. I wasn't helping her for the money. I was helping her because it felt like the right thing to do. She was like family. And that word, family, has a way of loosening a person's boundaries without them even noticing. But boundaries, once gone, are hard to rebuild. I first realized something was wrong one morning when I opened my kitchen cabinet and saw the same can of coffee sitting there for the third week in a row. Normally, Lisa would have replaced it by now. She always made sure we had the same brand, the one she called the good kind. But lately, she hadn't been doing that. In fact, she hadn't been doing much of anything. She'd started coming home late, barely talking to me, spending most of her time in her room with the door closed. When I'd knock, she'd call out, "Just a minute," but never open up. It was subtle at first, just small silences, shorter smiles. But I could feel her pulling away. One evening, I made chicken stew, her favorite. I'd even baked cornbread to go with it, the way she liked. She came home late, around 9, her eyes glued to her phone. "Dinner's on the stove," I said softly. She nodded without looking up. "Long day?" I asked. "Yeah," she muttered, her voice flat. "Work stuff. You've been busy lately? Everything all right?" That got her to look up. There was a flicker in her eyes, something sharp. "Why do you ask?" I hesitated. "Just making sure you're okay." Her tone turned quick, defensive. "I told you I'm fine, Mom. You don't have to check up on me every 5 minutes." I nodded, swallowing that sting that only people you love can cause. I'd spent a lifetime learning how to hold my tongue when it mattered most, so I didn't say anything else. I just smiled, told her there was cornbread in the oven, and went to bed. The next morning, the stew pot was untouched. A week later, she came to me, standing in the kitchen doorway with that soft, practiced smile. "Hey, Mom," she said, voice syrupy sweet. "Do you think you could help me with something? My tuition payment's late, and they're threatening to drop me from the class. It's only a few $100. I looked up from my coffee cup, studying her face. "I thought you said you dropped that class last month." Her eyes darted away for just a second, but it was enough. "Oh, that one. This is a different one." I felt that familiar tug in my chest, the one that said, "Don't question it, just help." But there was another voice now, quieter but stronger, the one that said, "Be careful." "I can't, sweetheart," I said gently. "Not this time. Things are getting tight." Her smile froze, then slowly melted into something colder. "Tight?" she repeated like she'd never heard the word before. "I mean it," I said, trying to keep my tone soft. "I've been dipping into my savings more than I should. I just can't keep—" She cut me off with a small laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. "You're serious?" "Yes," I said. "I am." For a moment she didn't speak, just stared at me like she didn't recognize the person sitting in front of her. Then finally she said, "Wow, okay." She turned, grabbed her purse, and left without another word. That was the first time she didn't call me Mom. The silence that followed was something I hadn't felt in months. Heavy, still, unforgiving, the kind of silence that feels like a door being shut in slow motion. Days went by without a text or call. The house felt empty again, like it had before she came into it. The dishes stayed clean longer, the lights dimmer. The only sounds were the clock ticking and the wind pushing against the old wooden shutters. I told myself she was busy. I told myself she just needed space. But deep down I knew. I'd seen that look before. The one people give when they've already decided you've outlived your usefulness. One night, I sat on the couch flipping through old pictures of Sarah, my daughter. I hadn't done that in years. The memories hurt, but they also reminded me of something I'd forgotten. What real love looked like. It wasn't always easy, but it was honest. Sarah never took without giving something back. Even as a teenager, she'd leave me little notes around the house. "Love you, Mom. Don't forget to eat. You're my favorite person." I'd given that same kind of love to Lisa, but I hadn't gotten it in return. What I got instead was absence. A quiet withdrawal of affection once the giving stopped. A week later, I decided to check my finances. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was that little whisper of doubt that had been sitting in my gut for months. It was late, past midnight, and I was lying in bed, unable to sleep. I reached for my phone, opened my banking app, and scrolled through the transactions. I wasn't expecting to see anything unusual, but then I did. Several transfers, small ones at first. $40 here, $75 there, then bigger ones. $200, $500, $1,000, all sent through an app I didn't recognize. The description just said, "Transfer complete." I sat up, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. I went through the dates one by one. Every withdrawal had happened over the last few weeks. Times when Lisa had been home alone, times when I'd left my purse on the counter or my laptop open. At first, I wanted to believe it was a mistake. Maybe I'd forgotten something, made a payment without realizing. I even whispered out loud, "It has to be a mistake." But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I confronted her, or tried to. She walked in just after 10, wearing that same casual calm that had once made me feel safe. I was sitting at the table with my phone in hand. "Lisa," I said softly, "can we talk?" She froze, halfway through setting down her keys. "Sure, Mom, what's up?" I turned my phone toward her. "These transfers, do you know anything about them?" For a second, something flickered in her expression, something quick and sharp, but she smoothed it over fast. "No, why?" "They're from my account," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Money's missing. Thousands of dollars," she blinked, then scoffed. "You think I took it?" "I didn't say that," I replied, though my heart already knew I had. "I just want to understand what's happening," she laughed, a sound I didn't recognize. "You're really accusing me? After everything I've done for you?" I stared at her, the irony twisting in my stomach. "Everything you've done for me?" She crossed her arms, her tone sharp now. "Yeah, I've been here, haven't I? Keeping you company, helping around the house, making sure you're not lonely. You think that's free?" The words hit like a slap. For the first time, I didn't recognize the woman standing in my kitchen. The same woman who used to call me Mom now looked at me like a stranger. Like someone standing in her way, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just sat there, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "I trusted you," I said quietly. She rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic. I'll pay you back." And with that, she grabbed her bag and left. That was the last time I saw her for a while. In the days that followed, I went through every account, every statement. The total was worse than I'd thought. Over $7,000 gone. It wasn't just the money, though. It was what it meant, that she could take from me so easily, so quietly, and still sleep at night. The silence returned, but this time it didn't feel like peace. It felt like betrayal sitting in the corners of every room. I'd walk past the guest room and see the bed she used to sleep in, the pillow still dented, and feel my stomach twist. For the first time in a long time, I locked my doors at night. I'd given Lisa everything I had, my trust, my home, my love, and she'd turned it into currency. And the worst part was, I didn't hate her for it. I hated myself for not seeing it sooner, for letting my loneliness write checks my heart couldn't cash. But that's the thing about pain. Eventually it stops asking permission. It just starts teaching, and soon enough, it would teach me that losing money was nothing compared to what I was about to lose next. When I opened the front door that afternoon and called her name, I didn't expect anything dramatic. I expected the same small routines we had fallen into. A hum of the kettle, the clink of a spoon, a lazy apology for being late. Instead, the house answered me with nothing, and then a footstep from upstairs, quick, hurried, like someone trying to hide a secret behind the back of a cardigan. I found Lisa in the sunroom, phone in hand, cheeks flushed from whatever conversation had just ended. She looked up at me with that practiced softness she always used when she wanted something. For a moment, I felt the old ache of wanting to fix things for someone else. I felt the years fall away, the loneliness soften. Then I remembered the bank statements. I remembered the transfers. I remembered the nights I lay awake counting pennies and trying to decide whether to buy my groceries or heat the water for a wash. "Can we talk?" I asked, and heard how small my own voice sounded. She straightened, set the phone down, and walked toward me with a smile that had once made me light up inside. "Sure, Marg," she said, the nickname she liked to use when she wanted to sound familiar. "What's up?" I took a breath, steadying myself. I'd practiced this confrontation in my head 100 times in the past week. The words I would say, the way I would keep my temper. I did not want to be the woman who shook and shouted and scared away whatever dignity she had left. I wanted to be clear. I wanted to be honest. Mostly, I wanted to hear the truth. "Your transfers," I began, holding the paper in my hand like a small damning relic. "There are withdrawals from my account I didn't authorize. Lots of them. I don't understand." For a beat she looked puzzled, brows knitting together, and I almost believed she was innocent. But then her expression shifted. It hardened, the way a storm cloud sets its face against the sun. "Mom? Seriously?" she said, voice low, the softness gone. "You're accusing me of stealing?" "I'm asking you about the money," I said. "I found transfers, thousands of dollars, and they went to your account. I want to know why." She laughed then, a short, sharp sound that didn't reach her eyes. "You looked through my phone? You think I'd—" "Marg, come on. That's invasive." She took a step back as if I'd lunged at her. "You always do this. You always take things too far." I felt the old reflex to apologize rise in me. The reflex that had, for decades, smoothed over tempers and kept people near. But something steadied inside me. Years of tending to small crises had taught me how to hold still when the world tilted. I swallowed hard and kept my hands folded in my lap. "I didn't look through your phone," I said slowly. "I looked at my bank statements. I have records, dates, times, transfers that line up with when you were here alone, when I left for errands. I don't want to embarrass you, Lisa. I want to understand." Her face went white at that, and for a second I thought she might break. But then she blinked, collected herself, and said in a voice that was too high, too bright, "You're trying to control me. You're trying to keep me small so I'll depend on you. I thought you were different." She took a step forward now, hands on her hips, the confident posture she used when she wanted to make herself seem larger than she was. Those words cut with a kind of cruelty I hadn't expected. Control, dependence. She had been the one who called me Mom. She had been the one who accepted the car down payment, the tuition help, the phone bill paid on a Friday when she cried and said she'd been late to work. I thought of the nights we talked about dreams, her dreams to get to college, to get a job that didn't leave her exhausted and hungry. I had wanted to help that girl, but the person standing in front of me now looked like someone else entirely. "Control?" I repeated. "Lisa, I gave you a room in my house. I cooked your meals. My voice broke and I stopped. I had promised myself I wouldn't let the anger rise, and the memory of her quick, practiced apologies pushed the heat down. I helped you because I wanted to, because I thought you were family. And now you want to put me in a prison of your making," she snapped. "You want to look through my life because you're afraid of being alone. That's not love, Margaret. That's ownership." The word landed and lodged. Ownership. It made my chest itch with shame and disbelief. I began to speak, to tell her how wrong she was, about kindness and boundaries and the difference between being generous and being taken from. But she wasn't listening. She walked past me toward the door, slamming it so hard the glass in the window trembled. I stood there in the sudden hush, the house pressing in on me with the weight of the slammed door. Her footsteps receded down the street, angry and sure. For a moment, all I could hear was my own breathing, and the tick of the wall clock as if it, too, were judging me for having believed too easily. I felt small and simultaneously incandescent, with a kind of indignation I hadn't allowed myself in years. At first, the hurt had been the loudest thing. There is nothing quite like the sound of someone who called you Mom slamming the door on you. It is a sound that rearranges everything you thought you knew about yourself, and for a bottle-clear moment I sat on the sofa and let it hurt. I thought of all the ways I'd tried to hold the people I loved with a gentle hand and been used for it. I thought of Sarah and the little notes she'd left me, and how different that kind of closeness had been. Reciprocal, honest. The loneliness I'd been fighting to fill had become a door I'd left open to anyone who asked for refuge. But the hurt was not the final thing I felt. After it came something steadier, a kind of clear, crisp resolve. It wasn't the volcanic fury I had once imagined would save me. It was quieter, like the steady breath you take before you step into something hard and necessary. I went to the kitchen, made a cup of tea, and sat at the table with the bank printout spread out in front of me. The numbers looked small and ridiculous on the paper, just amounts and dates, and yet they were a map of the last months of my life. I traced a line from one transfer to another, and felt the pattern unfold like a flower, whose shape had been hidden until it was too late. I could have called her son or her friends or yelled from the rooftops. I could have let the neighbors know or posted about it on the community page. I could have wept and waited for the police report or the bank's slow bureaucracy to change anything. Those were options. But none felt like a reclaiming of myself. They felt like surrendering to the spectacle of my own shame. Instead, I reached for the phone and called an old friend. Not the sort who would tell me what I wanted to hear, but the kind who looked at facts and paperwork and saw injustice for what it was. He was retired now, had been a lawyer for decades, and had once helped me with the trust my husband and I set up years ago. He picked up on the second ring. "Margaret." His voice was the same blend of patience and dryness I remembered. "You sound like you're in the midst of a thunderstorm." I told him what I'd found. I told him about the transfers, the way Lisa had left, the mocking words she'd thrown back at me. I tried as best I could to keep the tremor out of my voice. He asked questions about dates, amounts, whether I had any written permission, whether Lisa had access to my checkbook, to my online banking. I answered each one, slow and precise, and as I did, the trembling in my hands calmed. There was a kind of relief in naming the details aloud, in translating a jumble of fear into facts that someone trained in law could work with. "Bring everything to my office tomorrow," he said finally. "We'll look at the paperwork. We'll send a letter, and we'll begin a formal complaint if the bank won't close out those transfers immediately. Don't let her back into the house. Change your passwords. And Marg, lock your doors." He didn't say the words I might have wanted to hear, like "you'll be all right," or "she'll pay." He said practical, steady things. That was what I needed. Practicality is a kind of mercy. It lets you do instead of drown. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet house for a while, the papers in my hands like a small arsenal. The television was off. Outside, the sun fell through the maples and painted little moving patches of light across the rug. I felt older than I had last month, and yet curiously more present. The betrayal had stripped away an illusion, but it had also cleared space in my life for something I'd been forgetting. The truth that I had rights, even after everything I had given. I walked through the rooms I had kept for company. The sunroom where Lisa had spent her evenings. The guest bedroom she had once called cozy. I touched the frames on the mantel, the faded photo of Robert and me on our wedding day. "You didn't plan to get old this way, did you?" I murmured to the room, and the house answered with its usual hush. My voice sounded stronger than I felt. That evening, instead of curling up and letting the night swallow me, I made a list. Steps, one by one. Freeze accounts, call the bank in the morning, gather evidence, go to the lawyer. I wrote down the dates of transfers and matched them to moments Lisa had been alone in the house. I set aside the receipt book and my check register. I found, tucked inside an old cookbook, a yellowed envelope with a note from Sarah. "Call me if you need anything, Mom." Her handwriting was as fierce and loving as ever. I folded it into my wallet and felt a small, steady comfort. I didn't want revenge. That word tasted bitter in my mouth. I wanted justice and I wanted boundaries. I wanted to be able to walk through my own house without flinching at the empty chair where someone who once called me Mom had sat. I wanted the freedom to be generous again someday, but not at the cost of my dignity. Night came on soft and slow. I locked the doors early and turned down the heat a notch. In bed, I lay there and listened to the night sounds. The distant cars, a dog barking, the whispering trees. My heart still beat fast sometimes. And there were moments I thought of all the ways I had failed, all the boxes I should have checked, all the warnings I hadn't heeded. But underneath that, there was a quiet that was not surrender. It was a kind of readiness. I would sleep, and in the morning I would begin to undo the harm. I would not be the woman who let herself be taken apart without a fight. Love had been misplaced, yes. Trust had been broken. But I was not finished. I had paper and dates and a lawyer friend who knew how to move through systems that favored the quick and the loud. I had memories that were mine, and a body that still moved, and a mind that still could track and plan. There was a small, stubborn bloom of feeling then. Not quite hope. Not quite peace. Perhaps it was the kind of resolve that comes when you realize you have only yourself to rely on, and you decide you will be enough. I tucked the paperwork into a folder and put it by the phone. Dawn would bring paperwork and appointments and a different kind of work than I was used to. I felt tired but not broken. When sleep finally came, it wasn't the shallow kind that leaves you restless. It was deep and steady, the kind that seeds the morning with clarity. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would begin. The first time I sat down with my lawyer to go over the paperwork, I remember thinking how small the damage had looked on paper. Just numbers, just figures typed neatly in black ink, as if they weren't tied to sleepless nights, broken trust, and the ache of realizing someone you loved had used you. But as we started following the trail, one document at a time, the truth began to stretch out like a thread, unraveling across months of my life. Each page told its own quiet story. A credit line I never applied for, a personal loan with my name printed neatly across the top, small purchases that didn't match anything I'd ever bought, furniture stores, a rental application, even a boutique loan for business startup costs. At first, it didn't feel real. I'd never been the type to think of myself as a victim. I'd always paid my bills on time, balanced my checkbook, lived within my means. But there it was, clear as day. My signature, my name, my life tied to debts I never agreed to. The attorney, Mr. Graham, was methodical, patient. He looked through each page as if reading a mystery he already knew the ending to. "She used your account numbers," he said quietly, "and your personal information. These aren't accidents, Margaret. These are deliberate." I remembered nodding, but my throat had gone dry. Deliberate. It was such a clean word for something so painful. "She must have found your old tax returns," he went on. "Or that binder you kept for household records. You said she helped you organize them?" "Yes," I whispered. "She wanted to help. She said it would make my life easier." He sighed, jotting down notes. "We'll contact the authorities, but for now, freeze every account. The bank will need to verify the fraud reports. We'll document everything." I watched him write, his pen scratching softly against the paper, and thought about how many times Lisa had sat at that same kitchen table, sorting through those same papers with me. She'd been so gentle then, so earnest. "Don't you worry, Mom," she'd said, smiling as she flipped through envelopes. "I'll take care of everything," and she had, just not in the way I imagined. The next few weeks passed like slow rain. There were forms to fill, calls to make, meetings to attend. Every call started the same way. Polite voices asking for Mrs. Margaret Reed to confirm her date of birth, her address, her last 4 digits. Then came the pauses, the polite concern. "Ma'am, it appears your name is listed as co-signer on this account." I'd listen, breathing through it. My hands would tremble just slightly, but my voice always stayed steady. There's something about being betrayed that sharpens your calm. It teaches you that screaming doesn't fix anything. The detectives were kind but brisk. They took statements, gathered the evidence Mr. Graham had collected, and explained the process in that matter-of-fact tone people use when they've seen too many versions of the same story. "We'll locate her," one of them said, flipping through his notebook. "This kind of fraud doesn't go unnoticed. She'll face the charges." I nodded, but my heart wasn't focused on punishment. What I wanted wasn't revenge. It was clarity. I wanted to understand how someone could look you in the eyes, call you mom, and still see you as a means to an end. I wanted the truth, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. That night, after the officers left, I sat alone at the kitchen table again. The same space that had once been filled with laughter and shared dinners now felt like a witness to everything that had gone wrong. I thought about calling my daughter's old number, even though I knew no one would answer. Sometimes when you've lost one kind of love, you reach for another, even if it's just a memory. But instead, I opened my journal. The one I hadn't touched since Lisa moved in. The first entry I wrote was simple: "I am still here." Then, the next day, another. She took what she could, but she didn't take me. And each day after that, the words came easier. Writing became a quiet ritual, not to relive the pain, but to remind myself that it had shape, that it was real, and that I could contain it. About 3 weeks after the investigation began, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring once, twice. On the third ring, I answered. "Margaret?" It was her. Lisa. Her voice was shaky, thinner than I remembered. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just let the silence hang there between us. That same silence she'd left me with when she walked out. "I didn't mean for things to go like this," she said finally. "They came to my job. They're saying I stole from you. That's not true, I swear. You gave me permission. You said you wanted to help." My hands clenched around the phone. "Lisa," I said softly. "I said I wanted to help. I didn't say you could use my name to take loans." "I was going to pay it back," she blurted. "I just needed time. I thought if I could get things started." "You thought wrong," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. I could hear her breathing hard on the other end, the sound of panic rising. "They're saying I could go to jail," she said. "Please, Mom, Margaret, please. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding, please." That word, Mom, cracked something in me, but it didn't break me. It just made the air between us feel heavier. "Lisa," I said, my tone slow and even. "You don't owe me the money." She went quiet, confused. "What?" "You don't owe me the money," I repeated. "You owe yourself the truth." I let that sink in. Then I added, "And until you face it, no one can help you." There was a pause. Long, shaky, like she was searching for something to say that could rewind the last few months. But there was nothing left to rewind. When she finally whispered, "I'm sorry," it didn't sound like a confession. It sounded like a child who'd been caught and didn't know what else to do. I didn't answer. Not right away. I just listened to her breathing on the other end, remembering the laughter, the shared meals, the softness that had once felt so real. And then, without anger, without tears, I said quietly, "Goodbye, Lisa," and I hung up. It didn't feel triumphant. It didn't feel bitter. It felt still, like setting something down that had been too heavy to carry any longer. That night, I walked out to the porch. The air was cool, the stars dim behind the clouds. I sat there for a while, watching the wind move through the trees. For the first time in months, I didn't feel watched, or needed, or drained. I just felt here. In the days that followed, the legal process continued on its own. The authorities handled the paperwork, the statements, the reports. I answered what I had to, signed what was needed. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't want to know every detail of what happened to her after that, because by then, something inside me had shifted. There's a difference between forgiving someone and freeing yourself from them. Forgiveness is about mercy, but release, that's about survival. It's the moment you realize you don't need the apology to move on. You just need to stop standing in the same place where the hurt began. In my quiet moments, I still thought about her. Not the version who lied or took, but the girl who laughed in my kitchen, who made me coffee on slow mornings, who called me Mom and meant it, maybe just for a little while. I don't think all of it was fake. I think some part of her did love me, in the only way she knew how. It just wasn't enough to make her good. Mr. Graham called a few weeks later to tell me the bank had reversed most of the fraudulent charges. "It won't fix everything," he said gently. "But it's a start." I thanked him. But what I didn't tell him was that the real fix had already begun long before that call. It started the night I told Lisa she owed herself the truth. It started when I finally stopped, trying to rescue someone who didn't want saving. And as I sat there, sipping tea on my porch in the soft glow of evening, I realized that I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just clear. Clear about what I'd lost and what I still had. Some people call that peace. I call it coming home to yourself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally on my way there. It's funny how peace doesn't arrive the way you expect it to. It doesn't knock loudly or make some grand entrance. It slips in quietly, like sunlight through thin curtains. Soft, unannounced, but steady. By the time spring rolled around, my life had changed in ways I hadn't planned but somehow needed. The big house in Charleston, the one filled with echoes and old pain, had become too much. Too many rooms that remembered too much. So I sold it, packed up what little I cared to keep, let the rest go, and moved into a small cottage not far from the coast. The first morning I woke up there, I heard the ocean through the window. The air smelled like salt and jasmine, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped in my own story. The cottage was small, just 2 rooms and a porch that looked out toward the dunes, but it was mine. Everything about it felt intentional. The chipped mugs I'd chosen, the faded quilt on the bed, even the uneven little garden patch that I promised myself I'd bring back to life. It took a while for my hands to remember what peace felt like. For months, they'd only known paperwork, documents, and the tight grip of worry. But now, they pressed gently into the earth again, soil beneath my nails, the smell of damp dirt, the quiet rhythm of planting things that didn't demand anything but patience. Some afternoons, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of tea and watch the light shift across the yard. The sound of the sea carried on the wind, and seagulls called like old storytellers gossiping in the distance. I didn't think about Lisa much anymore, not in anger, not even in sadness. When her face crossed my mind, it felt like a memory from a different life, one that had taught me what I needed to learn, then quietly closed its chapter. I'd started volunteering again, something small but meaningful. A local community center offered literacy classes for women rebuilding their lives. Some were single mothers trying to find steady ground again, others survivors of bad marriages or bad luck. Every week, I sat in a circle with them, helping sound out words and sentences and listening to their stories. At first, I didn't think I belonged there. What could I teach anyone after all that had happened? But I soon realized that healing doesn't make you an expert. It just gives you language for what survival looks like. And in those faces, those quiet, determined women tracing words with their fingers, I saw something of myself. The strength it takes to start over. The courage it takes to stay soft after being hurt. One woman, Gloria, reminded me a lot of Lisa. She was young, quick to laugh, and full of restless energy. One day during class, she said to me, "You talk about forgiveness like it's easy." I smiled and shook my head. "It's not," I said. "It's just quieter than people think." She didn't understand right away. But that was okay. I didn't understand it either, not when I was her age. Most evenings after class, I'd walk home down the narrow coastal road, the sky painted in gold and lavender streaks. Sometimes I'd stop and watch the sun sink below the horizon, the light melting into the water. It reminded me of the way things end, not abruptly, not harshly, just slowly fading into something new. One afternoon, I came home to find a letter in the mailbox. The handwriting was familiar, slanted, uncertain. For a moment, I just stood there, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. It was from Lisa. The letter was short, apologetic in the way people write when they don't know what else to say. She said she'd finished her community service, was back in school, and had been sober for 6 months. "I know I can't undo what I did," she wrote, "but I want you to know that I'm trying to be better." I sat down on the porch and read it twice. The first time, my heart clenched. The second time, it loosened. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there quietly, listening to the waves, feeling the paper between my fingers. I never wrote back. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to. Some words don't need answering. Some stories don't need revisiting. I'd already forgiven her in my own way, but forgiveness doesn't always mean reconnection. Sometimes it just means peace. That night, I cooked a simple dinner: grilled fish, a little rice, and a handful of vegetables from my garden. As I ate, I realized how still the air felt around me, how full the silence was. Not the kind of silence that follows loss, but the kind that comes when you finally made peace with it. I thought back to all the times I'd mistaken being needed for being loved. All the ways I'd poured myself into others, believing that giving was the same as being seen. But sitting there in that small kitchen, the window open to the sound of the sea, I understood something I hadn't before. Love that drains you isn't love. It's fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of not being enough unless you're giving everything you have. Peace, I learned, isn't about being untouched by pain. It's about knowing how to set it down when you've carried it long enough. One evening in late summer, I sat by the window as the sun dipped low over the horizon. The ocean shimmered gold, and a soft breeze carried in through the open window. I thought about Sarah, about Robert, about all the people I'd loved and lost along the way. And then I thought about the women I taught every week, the laughter that echoed in that small classroom, the hope that flickered in eyes that had seen too much. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. And that's when the thought came to me, quiet, but clear as a prayer. Family isn't who calls you mom. It's who stands beside you when the giving stops. The truth of it sank deep into me, like roots spreading quietly in good soil. For so long, I'd searched for love that filled the empty spaces left behind by loss. But now I understood. The love I'd been looking for wasn't something to receive. It was something to place, carefully, intentionally, where it could grow without being taken for granted. The next morning, I went out to my garden. The soil was cool and soft, rich from the rain that had fallen overnight. I knelt down, pressing my hands into it, and smiled. My hands had grown steadier again, stronger. I planted marigolds that day, bright, golden things that thrived in heat and hardship. The kind of flowers that don't need perfect soil to bloom. As I worked, I thought about the word healing. It's such a gentle word, but the work it takes is anything but. Healing asks you to look at what broke you and not turn away. It asks you to love yourself the way you once loved others, fiercely, without condition. By noon, the sun was high and warm on my back. I sat there for a while, dirt on my hands, peace in my chest, and realized that I wasn't just tending to plants. I was tending to myself, to the woman who had given too much, lost too much, and finally learned how to give differently. And that, I think, is what the end of a story should feel like. Not victory, not revenge, just a quiet understanding that you survived, and that surviving was enough. The waves outside rolled gently, steady and endless, and I let that sound carry me into the evening. Life had become simple again, not empty, just honest. I'm not sure what tomorrow holds, and that's all right. Some chapters are meant to end with calm, not climax. But if you've listened to my story this far, if you've seen yourself somewhere in these words, then maybe you understand what I finally did. Peace isn't found in what you get back. It's found in what you let go of, And if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own strength, your own quiet resilience, I'd love for you to stay with me. Share this story. Subscribe. Maybe someone else needs to hear that peace is still possible, even after everything, because it is. And sometimes, when the world feels heavy, all it takes to find it again is planting something new, right where you are.